A short while ago, voting finished in elections for new members of Labour's National Executive Committee. That's the party's governing body, which sets its strategic direction and oversees the policy-making process. So what's at stake in the contest? The NEC, as it's known, currently has 39 members, mostly composed of elected politicians, trade union representatives and members from constituency Labour parties. It's been finely balanced between members seen as those sympathetic to the Labour leader's plans and those broadly sceptical. At the 2017 conference, Labour decided to create 3 new positions representing party members, in response to the membership rising to more than 600,000 under Jeremy Corbyn. 9 candidates are competing for the 3 seats, and it's expected that the more pro-Corbyn trio will win. They're backed by Momentum, whose leader, Jon Lansman, is one of the candidates and a long-time advocate for a more left-wing Labour. There's concern among some in the party that this will entrench the power of those most enthusiastic about Jeremy Corbyn. Separately today is also the deadline for Labour members to give their views on the first phase of the party's democracy review, which is carried out by Jeremy Corbyn's close ally, Katie Clark. The proposals will be discussed by the NEC later this month. Well, our reporter Elizabeth Glinker spoke to Jon Lansman and asked him what his priority was if he wins a place on the NEC and why the contest had been so hard fought.
My priority is to see that the party becomes more of a members-led party, with members empowered, trusted, enabled to do what's necessary to win the next election. I think they've shown in the recent election what 600,000 members can do. To have millions of conversations and turn around an election campaign, the biggest turnaround we've had in an election campaign, in British history. So, I think more of that is what we need to actually win the next election. There's a debate. There are independent candidates. Not all the candidates are on slates. And there should be a debate. That's democracy. We're a democratic party.
Thinking about democracy, of course, we've got the first proposals of the democracy review expected this month.
Yes.
Is this review about making it easier for your faction to dominate and silence the people that you don't agree with?
Not at all. I mean, look, first of all, there have always been differences of view. I actually am delighted that the Labour Party, after 2 leadership elections, admittedly, has now, recognised that Jeremy's going to stay leader until he chooses otherwise, and so we're now uniting around, a real alternative to austerity.
Is this process about deselections? When you talk about democracy and the views of the members, the new members being heard, are we talking about deselections?
We will not campaign to deselect anybody, but it's right that the members get to choose who is the best person to represent, to stand for election and represent them in Parliament. And we've got 600,000 members now, who know their communities and who know the people they work with in their workplaces, and they are in the best position to make judgments about who the right candidates are. There are hundreds of thousands of members who are enthusiastic about the change in the Labour Party, and it's brought them into activity. It's tripled the size of the party. I think that, how can you see that as anything other than a good thing?
You signed that petition last month calling for the process for the selection of councillors in London to be rerun. Is that still a position that you would take?
Well, I do think that some of the selections in London and around the country have not been properly run. There has been collusion between the people overseeing elections and council leaders, and it's as if it's about minimising the number of dissidents in a Labour group. But we need debate amongst our elected representatives wherever we are in government, locally or nationally. And there should be a fair and reasonable process. That's all I'm after. I want to see in all internal selections and elections processes in which all sections of the party feel that they can back a candidate that they support, and the person with the most votes ends up winning, but at least they can feel they've had a fair process. That's all I want to see.
Well, that was Jon Lansman, and we'll find out if he was successful in the elections on Monday. We're joined now in the studio by Stephanie Lloyd from Progress. That's a group within Labour that has backed an alternative slate of candidates for the NEC, and Rachel Shabby is still here. She's a supporter of the group Momentum. Welcome to the programme, Stephanie. Why are you worried about Jon Lansman and the Momentum slate being elected?
I think our big worry about this is what's he going to do with the power that he then gets? So if you have, the balance of the NEC previously is about it's about challenge, it's about making sure there's fair processes. And actually what we're going to see is, rather than the Labour Party internally spending its time on fighting what is a shambolic Conservative government, it's going to spend its time, rather than trying to elect Labour MPs, electing Momentum MPs and deselecting current.
But isn't he just talking about democracy? The party has swelled its ranks with many new members, hundreds of thousands of new members, and they should have their say.
They should have their say, and that's absolutely fine. But I think one of the things that I find slightly hypocritical from Jon Lansman at best is the fact that, there has been a massive swell in our membership, and that is only a good thing. But rather than it being the grassroots people coming through as the candidates, it is the leader of that group, Momentum.
Supported by those grassroots supporters.
Supported, but yes, often shut out of the debate. I mean, I don't think we can say Momentum is particularly a democratic organisation in and of itself. We saw what they did with their constitution.
Right. Is it not a democratic organisation? I mean, do you understand the fears that are being expressed here by Stephanie?
I mean, I think what's happened is that, the party, it's got this historically high membership. It's over 500,000. It's, near the largest party in Western Europe. That's a lot of people. Now, to some people, what Momentum is doing and what the Labour leadership has said it wants to do and is doing through these NEC changes that it has proposed and the democratic review that it has proposed, it's democratising the party. Now, for some people who are used to a more polished, centralised, professionalised version of politics, that huge number of people getting into politics is going to look unruly. It's going to look messy. And I think that's what's happened. But I think it would be a mistake and a disservice to people who are engaged with politics in such a positive way. For the first time, people are reconnecting with the Labour Party, want to bring it to power, and to accuse them of behaving in an undemocratic way, I think does them a disservice.
I think there is a huge difference between the people that have got engaged in politics, particularly a large amount of young people, which was when I first got engaged in politics, was through the youth movement and campaigning on really important issues, and the leadership of Momentum, and they are two different things. And I think what we've seen is, even if you look at the democracy review, the party on the NEC, as soon as it had its control over that, rather than do the normal process for electing the youth rep, rather than doing any consultation with youth members or waiting for the democracy review on how the new NEC youth rep will be elected, in contradiction to what the current NEC youth rep wanted, it was whitewashed over in a way that was purely factional to try and get their candidates and their slate of people elected. So my worry with this stuff is not about how do we engage young people. I was out in the election door knocking with thousands of fantastic young people that have been involved, but they're the ones that are being constantly shut out by the leadership when it comes to the next stage of this. As we saw with Momentum,
not what they're saying, is
well,
it?
they shut down their own youth movement. So when there's any dissent, this week we saw Momentum shut down without any consultation their own youth movement that have supported and helped Jon get this election.
On that issue, do you think there is a risk here that actually Jon Lansman, although he said in that interview we don't want to see deselections or reselections, did then say that in some of the selections of councillors in London he felt there had been collusion, and he did want to see those rerun and represent the membership at large. In the end, isn't Jon Lansman and the Momentum wing of the party complaining about exactly the same thing as Stephanie is from another wing, is nobody likes dissent. Nobody wants anyone to disagree with their vision of what the party should look like.
This is messy. And it's angry.
So is that a yes?
And a lot of people... Well, it's trying to explain what's going on. You know, the things that have been going on with councillors, for instance, in Haringey, a lot of people are really, really angry with the way that council has behaved.
But is that not democracy as well?
And therefore, they have a right to say that they don't want them, and they have a right to say that they don't want those policies that are actually materially affecting their lives, damaging their lives, and that's absolutely fine.
It is absolutely fine.
But the way it's been portrayed is as some sort of takeover by a cult, which hasn't been the case at all.
But is it a takeover? It may not be a cult as such, but is it a takeover in an attempt to entrench the power, rightly or wrongly, of Jeremy Corbyn and Momentum?
But if people have joined the party because the politics of Jeremy Corbyn resonate with them and they believe that those policies are good for society and are democratically getting engaged in politics, what exactly is the problem with that?
And that's the prevailing mood. I mean, Rachel is representing what Labour Party members actually want to see, and they support the policies of Jeremy Corbyn. You're just not doing it well enough. You are not keeping up your side of the Labour Party. You're just not doing it as well as Momentum.
There is definitely a part of that. And I think, you know, what Jeremy and Momentum captured in terms of engagement and hope is not something that anybody should scoff at. And I certainly never would do so. My problem is what you then take people's aspirations with and what they want in terms of a future and make it into pure factionalism and about control and about controlling the entire party. And my worry with that is, and the perfect example was, I was sat at my local Labour Party meeting last night in Streatham, one of the most deprived areas in London and indeed the whole country. As even for the youth officer, there was a, you know, I think it's almost the best depiction of it, the most upwardly mobile, young, white, university-educated woman beats a 16-year-old local activist because she didn't have the right kind of politics or didn't know the right people and wasn't introduced onto a slate.
And doesn't that go against everything that you and Momentum and Jeremy Corbyn believe?
I have no idea, because I have no idea of the context of what you're describing. But what I do know is
we've seen councillors up and down the country who are representative of their own communities be deselected for people
we haven't.
Who are.
We actually haven't seen that. We've seen up and down the country. We've seen an upsurge of people getting involved in politics, whether it's at a constituency level or at a local level, and they have every right to do that, and they have every right to decide whether their candidate represents them or not. Now, as it happens, in most of the cases across the country, the Labour candidates that stood for the general elections are not being kicked out at all. In fact, the opposite is true, because they forged nice relationships. You know, the constituency and the candidate developed good relations during the snap election.
All right.
And they are not being kicked out.
What do you say about the criticisms and the accusations that are levelled about intimidation, about behaviour that has become toxic within the party against different factions that come from Momentum? So the accusations go on Twitter, on social media, or at meetings.
I mean, I'm not here to defend people being obnoxious, but I am here to say that sometimes some of this is going to look angry. People in Haringey, for instance, have every right to be angry at what that council tried to impose on their behalf with that sell-off of council housing. That is an entirely legitimate reaction to have.
Even to have that sort of behaviour then being expressed, as you say, in a messy, unruly and intimidating way?
I'm not here to support people being intimidating or obnoxious, but what I'm saying is that is not representative of what is going on up and down the country, and this tactic of honing in on, you know, obnoxious examples to try and make it representative of the entire movement does that movement a disservice.
I'm going to come back to you for a final word, but looking from the outside, the Conservatives have got a lot to be envious about, the membership numbers. We've been talking this week about how low, potentially, Conservative membership is.
And you're failing to get answers from Tory guests on
No, well,
how
that's
many
because they're
members
obviously
there
even
are.
lower than they fear.
So.
But, you know, if we're talking about 600,000, nearly 600,000 in Labour, and it's the fourth party for the Conservatives, how worrying is that?
Well, I think the Tories do have problems, massive problems with the grassroots, and very happy to dissect those. But I do also worry about, before the election, there was this huge number of Labour MPs who objected to Jeremy Corbyn's leadership on grounds of principle. And their silence since the election has been an extraordinary thing, a desertion of duty. And I think part of the reason is that they are intimidated by too many activists in the Labour Party who are unfortunately extreme. And I think it's good to hear this discussion between these two Labour activists, lifting the lid slightly on what I'm afraid aren't just isolated examples of intimidation and obnoxious behaviour. But I'm afraid there are too many people amongst that 600,000 membership who do seem to be behaving in ways that on Twitter we see all the time are well beyond the limits of decent comradely behaviour.
What do you say in response, Rachel?
I say that the Labour Party has got that many members and Momentum is doing so well because it has inspired people to get involved in politics in a way that we haven't seen for decades.
And do you think MPs haven't stood up since the election because they feel intimidated about standing against Jeremy Corbyn's position?
I suspect that the reason that they're silent is because that they have seen that Jeremy Corbyn's politics was successful and resonated with people.
There's one reason to accept that he might be an electoral force.
Well, maybe they increase their majorities, of course, in many cases. We have to end it there, but Stephanie Lloyd, I'm sorry I didn't give you another say, but thank you for coming in.
Thank you.